The message came in at 3:46 p.m. on December 23rd. I was folding napkins for a small holiday dinner I had planned just for myself. Nothing fancy. Just a little baked ham, mashed sweet potatoes, and a caramel flan I'd been saving in the freezer since October. Trevor's name popped up on my phone, and my heart lifted for half a second. Then I read what he wrote. "We don't have room for you this year. Paige's parents are staying longer than planned. It's just too many people." I didn't finish reading the second line. I stared at it, the glow from the Christmas lights outside flickering across the screen like some sick joke. I sat down at the kitchen counter, not because I was tired, but because I was stunned. It wasn't just that they weren't coming to pick me up. It wasn't that I wouldn't be at the table. It was that they didn't even want me there. No explanation, no apology, no warmth, not even a lazy excuse. Just a cold digital sentence that said everything. "You are not welcome." 10 minutes later, another message came in. A photo. Trevor's family, already dressed in coordinated red and green pajamas, standing in front of their massive tree. Paige, beaming. The kids holding up matching mugs. Everyone smiling. Except I wasn't in the photo, and I wasn't supposed to be. They'd taken the exact same photo last year. I remembered it clearly because I had been standing in the back, holding Leo, their youngest, as Paige adjusted her hair. Now they had perfectly recreated the same shot, minus me. It was deliberate. I scrolled back to last year's message thread. Just 1 year ago, I was the one making the pies. I was the one who roasted the turkey. I was the one who set the table while Trevor and Paige entertained their guests. I remember Paige saying, "Thank God you're here. I wouldn't survive this chaos without you." And now, just one text, and I was erased. I closed the messages. My eyes didn't burn. I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up, turned off the stove, and opened the window. The Florida breeze was soft and salty. From the 7th floor, I could see the parking lot below, dotted with cars. Some were still decorated with reindeer antlers or red bows. I looked down at the meal I had planned for myself. No. I walked to the cabinet where I kept my winter table settings. Behind the snowflake-printed plates was a white envelope, the one Paige had dropped off 3 weeks ago, saying it was a holiday care packet from a local senior center. I hadn't opened it. Now I did. Inside was a flyer from a legal firm. It read, "Protect your loved ones. Appoint a guardian today." My name was printed on the back, along with a case number. My fingers froze. The same week they said they wanted me to rest more. The same week Paige started offering to bring my groceries. The same week Trevor asked me if I felt more tired lately. I reached for the drawer under the sink, pulled it open and stared. There it was. A small orange pill bottle I did not recognize. The label had been half ripped, but the remnants read, Zolpidem, sleeping pills. My name was written on the label. My name, my handwriting. Except I had never taken sleeping pills in my life, and I certainly never ordered any. A chill rippled down my back. I thought back to 3 nights ago. I had woken up groggy, disoriented. I couldn't remember what time it was. I'd missed a call from Nancy, my neighbor. She said I didn't answer her knock on the door. I thought it was just the heat, maybe a little exhaustion. But now it all looked different. I grabbed my phone and typed a short message to Nancy. "Are you home?" Then I stopped, erased it. I walked to her door and knocked instead. She opened it right away. Her face fell the second she saw me. "You too?" That was all she said. Then she stepped aside and let me in. "If you're still listening, just pause here and think. What would you do if your own child tried to erase you?" Not just from the holiday table, but from your own life. This is just the beginning. I sat on Nancy's couch with the pill bottle still in my coat pocket. She was making tea, but neither of us said a word for a good 5 minutes. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and dust, the same scent it always carried during the holidays, but this time it felt heavy, off. When she finally came back and set the cups down, her hands trembled, not from age, from something else. She sat across from me, avoiding eye contact. I didn't press her. I didn't need to. I already knew. She looked down into her tea. Last year, her daughter moved her into this place after what she called a minor incident. Nancy had left the stove on too long, burned a pot of rice. It could have happened to anyone. But within a week, her access to her own bank account was gone. Her daughter told the staff here to call her first, before letting Nancy sign anything. She said it was for Nancy's protection. That was the word they used. Protection. Now Nancy only got a monthly allowance and a stack of colouring books from the discount store. She lifted her head and met my eyes. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. They make you feel like you're broken. I pulled out the pill bottle and set it on the table. She stared at it, then nodded, like it confirmed something she didn't want to admit until now. "They're not going to stop," she said. "Not until they've taken everything." I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Something colder took over. I stood up, thanked her, and went back to my unit without finishing my tea. Inside, the silence was louder than before. The holiday lights I had wrapped around the curtain rods blinked slowly, uselessly. I walked to the dresser, pulled out my old file box, and started opening tabs. The first thing I found was my power of attorney agreement, the one I'd signed years ago, long before Trevor married Paige. At the time, it was just a precaution, something the lawyer suggested when I turned 60. I had named Trevor as the secondary in case something happened to me. But I was still the primary. At least I used to be. I flipped through to the latest copy. There it was. My signature. Trevor's signature. A notarized page. Only one problem. The date was from 6 months ago, and I never signed anything 6 months ago. I pulled the old one to compare. The handwriting looked similar, but not the same. Not the way I write my M's, not the spacing between letters. Someone had copied my signature. I flipped through the rest, found a bank statement I hadn't looked at in weeks. The totals didn't match what I remembered. I wasn't broke, but a few $1,000s had moved, disappeared. I made a note, then I opened my bottom drawer. I kept a small notebook there, behind a stack of winter scarves. It was the one I used to write down every expense I didn't want to forget. Grocery runs, prescription pickups, gas for Trevor's car when I used to borrow it. Every cent counted. But 2 entries caught my eye. One was from last month. Paige had come by and asked me to sign a delivery slip for a package she said was for their new fridge. I'd written it down just in case. The other was 3 days later. Trevor came over, told me not to cook that day. He brought lunch. I had felt tired. I slept unusually long that night. I connected the 2 entries and felt my stomach drop. They were timing it. Visits, pills, conversations, slowly building a pattern they could point to, making me look forgetful, confused, incapable. Paige had even started leaving small notes on my fridge, instructions for heating leftovers, reminders for my appointments, acting like she was helping. But she wasn't helping. She was documenting. I walked to the closet and pulled out the bag I always kept packed for hurricane season. Passport, IDs, medical history, still there, untouched. I added the file folder with my documents. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and waited. My phone buzzed an hour later. It was Trevor. Saw you weren't answering earlier. Everything all right, Mum? I didn't respond. 2 minutes later, another message. Just wanted to remind you to take your meds. The blue bottle on the counter. He named the colour of the pill bottle I had found in my drawer. Not orange. Blue. It was a test. He wanted to see if I'd noticed the difference, if I responded with confusion, if I said something like, "What blue bottle?" or "I already took them." But I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my notebook and started writing down everything. Every conversation, every visit, every slip of paper. I logged the text, the message time, the colour he got wrong. This wasn't paranoia. It was happening. I could feel it in my bones. The last straw came when I opened my mail the next morning. A letter from the county. An application had been submitted for a change of legal guardianship. The name listed as guardian was Trevor R. Moreno, filed 3 days ago. I held the letter like it was burning through my skin. Then I stood up, walked to my cabinet, pulled out the small Christmas tree I had been too tired to decorate last week. I set it on the table, plugged in the lights. Then I reached for my phone and opened my contact list. There were 7 names I hadn't called in months. Neighbours, women from church, one man from my old book club who used a walker and lived on floor 5. I started dialing. Trevor had planned a Christmas without me, but I was about to plan one without him. The first person to answer my call was Linda from 7B. She was surprised to hear from me, but when I told her I was hosting a small dinner on Christmas Eve for some of the residents who didn't have family around this year, her tone shifted. She said she'd bring cranberry stuffing and asked if it would be all right to invite Mr. Kennelly from 8D. Of course it was. I said yes before she finished the sentence. By noon that day, I had 4 confirmations. By 5, I had 8. None of them asked why I was organizing a dinner so last minute. None of them mentioned the obvious, that the woman who used to cook every holiday for her son's family now had to pull together a gathering from scratch just to feel like a human being. They understood, without words. That was enough. But there was something else I needed to take care of. I walked down to the management office before they closed and requested to see the building's security logs. I told them I had misplaced something and thought maybe I had dropped it in the hallway. The desk clerk, Ron, was new and didn't ask too many questions. He printed a visitor access log for the last 2 weeks and handed it to me. I skimmed through quickly. Paige's name popped up 4 times. Each entry showed her keycard entry time and which door she used. 2 of the visits aligned perfectly with the days I had felt drowsy and slept longer than normal. The 3rd visit was even more interesting. She had signed in at 6:12 a.m., stayed for 11 minutes, then left. I asked Ron if there were hallway cameras active. He said yes. I requested a copy of footage from the east hallway, outside apartment 713, covering the timeframes Paige visited. He hesitated but eventually agreed to burn the footage onto a USB stick. I would need to return it by Friday. I thanked him, took the drive, and headed straight back upstairs. Inside my apartment, I plugged it into my laptop and skipped through the time-stamped clips. Most were empty halls, cleaning carts, an old man walking his dog. Then I found it. Paige, in a light grey hoodie, entering my unit alone at 6:12 a.m. She had a white pharmacy bag in hand. Less than 2 minutes later, she left the apartment empty-handed. 11 minutes total inside. She had lingered. I replayed the clip again, then paused it at the exact frame her hand touched my door handle. This wasn't guessing anymore. This was fact. I copied the footage onto a second drive and labeled it. Then I saved it to a cloud folder and backed it up to another secure email. I wasn't going to be careless, not now. That evening, As I was making my list of groceries, I heard a knock at my door. It was Mr. Dalton from across the hall. Widowed, quiet, always wore the same brown cardigan. He handed me a small card with gold lettering. It was an invitation from the building's social committee. Holiday potluck on Christmas night. He said he didn't plan on going, but he appreciated that I was organizing something smaller, something less loud. I told him he was welcome at my table, no pressure. Before he left, he paused. He said he remembered something. 2 weeks ago, he'd seen Paige in the elevator with a folder. She had been talking to someone on the phone, saying something about evaluations, memory logs, timeline matching. She didn't notice he was standing there. He hadn't thought much of it. But now it made him uncomfortable. I wrote it down. The next morning, I called the church office. I asked for Sister Janice, who ran the food pantry and the community kitchen where I used to volunteer every Sunday. She hadn't heard from me in months, not since I pulled back after Trevor said I needed more rest. She was thrilled to hear my voice. When I told her I wanted to borrow 2 large roasting pans and possibly a dessert tray if they had one to spare, she didn't hesitate. I could pick them up any time. Then she asked if I needed help with transportation. I told her I'd manage. I just needed a little space to cook for some friends. Before we hung up, she said something that stuck with me. People always return to light. Sometimes it's dimmed, but it's still there. I wasn't sure if she meant me or herself or both. I went downstairs later that day and left a note on the bulletin board next to the laundry room. Christmas Eve potluck, Unit 713, 6 p.m. If you're spending the night alone, come hungry. By evening, someone had scribbled beneath it in pen, "I'll bring warm cider." Marta, 5C. Then another appeared, sweet potato casserole. Tina, 9A. Then another, frozen pumpkin pie. Might be expired. Who cares? Roy, 6D. It grew from there. Something in this building had shifted. There was a current now, a movement, and I was at the center of it. But I hadn't forgotten what this was really about. Trevor and Paige had tried to remove me from my own life, slowly, quietly, like replacing a foundation brick by brick, hoping no one would notice until the house collapsed. But I had noticed. And now I was rebuilding, with witnesses, with evidence, with a list of names who'd seen them lurking. The next phase wouldn't be subtle. I wasn't interested in peace offerings. I was planning the kind of Christmas they would never forget. And it wouldn't require forgiveness. It would require clarity. Public, undeniable, permanent clarity. The morning of December 24th, I was out the door by 7:45. I had an appointment at Dr. Geller's office, my primary care physician for the last 6 years. He was always straightforward, never condescending, and he trusted me to know my own body. That alone made him rare in his profession. The waiting room was half empty when I arrived. I didn't need an exam. I wasn't there to complain. I told the receptionist I was requesting printed documentation of my prescription history for the last 12 months. No changes, no gaps. I wanted the original copy with the office seal. 10 minutes later, I had it in my hands. 12 months. No Ambien, no Zolpidem, no sleep medications whatsoever, not even over-the-counter recommendations. I walked out, tucked the envelope into my coat, and felt the wind cut sharp as a blade across my face. It was going to be a cold Christmas Eve in Florida. Back home, I scanned the document and saved it under a folder named December Health Log. Then I backed it up to 2 cloud drives and printed 3 more copies, just in case. After that, I called the on-site nurse at my complex. Her name was Rochelle. She was in her early 50s, worked 3 jobs, and didn't waste time with pleasantries. She came to check on me a few times a month and always said the same thing: "You're more alert than half my patients under 40. I told her I needed a neutral witness to a drawer inspection, that someone had possibly tampered with my medication, and I wanted it documented properly. She said she'd be there in 10 minutes. When she arrived, I didn't explain everything, just enough. She followed me to the bedroom. I opened the drawer. Inside, neatly pushed to the back, was the orange prescription bottle labeled in my name. Still there. Rochelle picked it up, turned it in her hand, examined the label. "This isn't from any pharmacy we work with," she said. She checked the fill date. It was printed 2 weeks ago, but my last recorded visit to a medical provider was 3 months prior. Rochelle made a note of that. Then she wrote a quick incident report, signed it, and handed me a copy. I added it to the folder. By noon, my apartment had been transformed. The dining table was extended with a fold-out leaf, a clean white tablecloth stretched across it, and I had arranged the borrowed serving trays from the church kitchen. I set the Christmas tree in the corner, added a few candles and pine cones to the centerpiece, and laid out 12 mismatched chairs I had borrowed from neighbors. Everything was nearly ready, but I had one more stop to make. At 1:15, I walked across the parking lot to the manager's office. Ron, the desk clerk who had given me the security logs, looked up and smiled politely. I told him I needed to submit a formal complaint regarding potential fraudulent medical intervention on the premises, and I wanted to document it properly in the building's resident safety record. He blinked. I handed him the printed doctor's note, Rochelle's incident report, and a screenshot from the security footage that clearly showed Paige entering my unit with a pharmacy bag. Ron said he would forward everything to the complex director, Ms. Hanley, who handled legal protocols. I said I expected a confirmation email by end of day. Then I turned and walked out. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I wasn't asking for protection. I was building the file. By the time I got back, a few early guests were already knocking. Marta from 5C came with 2 loaves of banana bread and a shaky voice that said she hadn't been out to a dinner since her husband passed in 2018. Roy from 6D brought that expired pumpkin pie he had promised, still frozen but covered in whipped cream and laughter. The room filled slowly but steadily. By 5 p.m., the apartment was buzzing, coats draped over the backs of chairs, jokes bouncing between strangers who had only ever nodded to each other in elevators. Christmas music hummed low in the background, just enough to anchor the air without overwhelming it. At 5:30, I excused myself and stepped into the bedroom. I opened my laptop, plugged in the USB drive with the security footage. Then I opened a second tab and pulled up the scan of the fake prescription bottle. Next to that, the incident report. Next to that, the doctor's note. All arranged. All ready. I minimized the windows and left the setup open on the table by the wall-mounted television. Then I returned to the living room and made an announcement. Dinner at 6, 1 toast, 1 video. That's all I said. No one asked. They didn't need to. At 5:58, I received a text from Trevor. "Hey, hope you're doing okay tonight. Paige says you were acting confused last week. If you need anything, let us know." I read the message. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied with just one word. Understood. At 6 p.m. sharp, I dimmed the lights in the dining area. Guests took their seats. Dishes were passed, glasses filled, laughter flowed like water. And just before the first fork touched a plate, I walked over to the wall and hit play. The screen lit up. Paige appeared, caught in high definition, entering my unit with the pharmacy bag. Silence fell across the room. Then I clicked once more, and the next window appeared. My doctor's note, then the nurse's incident report, then the scan of the fake bottle. No commentary, No speeches, just facts, just sequence, just truth. I watched as heads turned, as glances exchanged, as disbelief turned to understanding. No one said a word. The silence said enough. By the time the video ended, no one was eating. The room held its breath. I walked back to the table and picked up the remote. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The images had done their work. Paige's face on the screen, the timestamp, the pharmacy bag, the evidence side by side, lined up like dominoes. I turned the lights back on. Then I walked to the kitchen, picked up the carving knife, and began slicing the ham as if nothing had happened. Slowly, conversation returned. A little forced at first, a few awkward sips of cider, nervous laughs. Someone commented on the scent of the rosemary. But the shift was clear. The truth had landed, and no one at that table would forget what they saw. After dinner, a few people stayed behind to help clean. Marta wiped down the dishes while I wrapped the leftovers. Roy offered to take out the trash. As they moved around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Not fear, not confusion, not exhaustion. Control. At 8:12 p.m., I received a second message from Trevor. "We heard you had people over tonight. Hope that means you're feeling better. Just checking in." That told me everything I needed to know. He was watching. Someone in the building had told him. Someone had either seen the dinner or heard the TV or glanced at the guest list on the bulletin board. Maybe one of the residents had mentioned it during a phone call to a family member. It didn't matter. Trevor knew something was up. He just didn't know what. Yet. I didn't answer the message. I had a better response in mind. The next morning, Christmas Day, I got up early. I dressed in a simple grey sweater, black pants, and my old walking shoes. Then I went to the hallway, locked my apartment, and rode the elevator down to the lobby with a manila envelope tucked neatly under my arm. Inside that envelope were 5 printed documents. Page 1, the prescription history from Dr. Geller. Page 2, the incident report from Nurse Rochelle. Page 3, the screenshot of Paige entering my unit with the pharmacy bag. Page 4, a typed list of time-stamped visits matched to my physical symptoms. Page 5, a short letter from me addressed to the building director, requesting formal acknowledgement that unauthorized interference in a resident's medical autonomy had occurred, and that the matter now involved family members attempting to override existing powers of attorney. I handed the envelope directly to Ron at the desk. He looked at it, then at me. I told him, politely but firmly, that I expected it forwarded to Ms. Hanley before noon. He nodded, visibly tense. Then I turned and walked out the front door. The church kitchen was already open when I arrived. Sister Janice met me at the side entrance with a warm hug and a knowing look. She said nothing about the folder in my hands. She just handed me a fresh tray of cornbread and a second foil pan of green bean casserole. As I loaded the food into the car, she slipped a sealed envelope into my pocket. "You might want this," she said. "Consider it a late Christmas present." I didn't ask. I drove home. Back in my apartment, I sat at the table, opened the envelope, and found a letter on church letterhead. It was signed by Sister Janice and 2 other staff members, dated 9 months prior. It confirmed that a monetary withdrawal had been made from the church's community fund under my name, authorized by Trevor Moreno, acting on my behalf. I had never seen that letter before. I hadn't authorized anything. And now, I had the missing piece. This wasn't just about pills or manipulation. It wasn't just about guardianship or control. It was about money, reputation, access. Trevor hadn't just tried to erase me. He had impersonated me to access charitable funds, using my name and status in the church to pull money into his account. And the church, trusting my name, had processed it. But now they knew, and they had given me proof. I scanned the letter and added it to my file. Then I wrote an email to Ms. Hanley, attached every document, and hit send. I CC'd her assistant, the resident council president, and the building's legal coordinator. Then I printed the whole packet again, bound it with a clip, and slid it into a second envelope marked Copy 2. I placed that copy in my neighbour's lockbox. Insurance. Trevor had tried to build a narrative about a mother who was fading, who couldn't manage her own life, who needed help, needed oversight, needed to be handled. Now I had rewritten the narrative, this time with dates, with facts, with proof, and most importantly, with witnesses. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need screaming. All I needed was to put the right pieces in the right hands and then let gravity do what it does best. Pull everything down, hard. By the time I finished organizing, it was nearly 4 in the afternoon. I looked out the window. The courtyard below was quiet. Just a few residents walking their dogs, someone in a wheelchair reading under the awning. Peaceful. I sat down at the kitchen table, exhaled. Then I opened my notebook and made a final note at the bottom of the page. Cycle broken. Tomorrow, I would let the fire begin. I spent the night assembling everything, not just documents, not just timelines. I was preparing a stage. By sunrise, my apartment no longer looked like a retired woman's quiet home. It looked like the war room of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and who she was doing it for. The table was cleared. On it, I laid 3 sets of labelled binders, one for the building director, one for church leadership, and one for myself. Each had colour-coded tabs: prescription history, incident reports, camera stills, withdrawal letters, timeline breakdowns, dates, times, names, all of it. Then I opened the second drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a manila envelope I hadn't touched in years. It was labelled with my handwriting, neat and simple. Legal, durable power of attorney. Inside was the original copy, notarized and still smelling faintly of ink and dust. Trevor's name appeared second, under mine, listed only as a successor, never as primary, never with control. I made 2 certified copies. One would go to Rochelle, one would go to Sister Janice. By mid-morning, Marta had texted to say she had extra candles if I needed ambiance for the next dinner. Roy offered to bring folding chairs from the laundry room. I thanked them both, but kept the next gathering unannounced. I didn't need another party. I needed structure, I needed control, and I needed timing. At 11:40 a.m., I knocked on the door of Unit 815. Mrs. Evelyn McCaskill answered, holding a half-eaten cracker and blinking at me like she hadn't seen daylight in days. She used to run the holiday crafts committee before her arthritis got worse, and her daughter moved her upstairs with promises of full-time care that never came. I asked her one simple thing. Would you be willing to help me organize a small gathering for women in the building this Friday afternoon? Quiet. Purposeful. She nodded before I even finished. By noon, I had 6 confirmations. I booked the community room using the resident portal. I labelled it Resident Safety Workshop. No fanfare, just a simple event title. No details, no mention of names, just a time, a room, and a reason. The rest of the day moved like clockwork. I called Sister Janice and told her I'd be stopping by again for another pickup. She said one of the volunteers had already prepped a sheet pan of lemon bars. I told her I'd also be delivering something to her. She said she'd be waiting. Before I left, I grabbed the letter she'd given me about the monetary withdrawal signed under my name by Trevor. I placed it in a padded envelope and sealed it. Then I printed one more copy of the building complaint I had filed and included a note addressed directly to the resident council. The storm was moving in. When I arrived at the church kitchen, Sister Janice had both hands deep in a mixing bowl. She smiled without turning. "Third visit in 4 days. I'm starting to think you miss us." I handed her the envelope. She took it and set it aside gently. Then she walked over to the freezer, pulled out the lemon bars, and pressed them into my hands with a wink. On my way out, she handed me a folded card. It was from the church treasurer. Inside was a short typed note. It stated that the church had conducted an internal audit and confirmed that 2 separate withdrawals had been made using my name. Neither had been authorized directly by me. Both had been processed through electronic submission from an email address not listed on the member registry. One name appeared on the request confirmation: Trevor R. Moreno. I now had it in writing. When I got back to the apartment, I added the new note to my main binder. Now the weight of the file felt right, heavy enough to sink any defense. That evening, I put the final pieces into place. I logged onto my building's online forum, a place usually reserved for complaints about laundry machines and parking assignments. I created a new thread. The title was simple: Navigating Care, Consent, and Control, a resource meeting for independent seniors. No names, no threats, no details. Just a line at the bottom that said, "All residents welcome. Documents provided upon request. Hosted by El Moreno." By midnight, I had 13 views. By morning, 29. I wasn't going to warn Trevor. I wasn't going to tip off Paige. They would feel it coming when it was too late to run. The next day, I went to Rochelle's station and gave her the copy of the power of attorney. She asked if something had escalated. I said not yet, but it would. She looked me in the eyes and nodded once. That was enough. Before dinner, I returned to the community room to set things up. Nothing elaborate, just a semicircle of chairs, a side table with handouts, water bottles, and a few trays of snacks. The lemon bars went in the center. Then I set the projector up and loaded a single slide. It read, "Senior Autonomy and Legal Safeguards. Know what's yours." Underneath it, the date and my name. When I got back to my unit, I opened the last drawer in the hallway cabinet and pulled out the photo frame that had been turned face down for weeks. It was a picture of me, Trevor, and my late husband, taken one Christmas morning 10 years ago. We were sitting on the porch swing, hands wrapped around mugs of cocoa. Back when family meant something. Before manipulation, before quiet betrayals, before guardianship paperwork dressed up like love. I looked at my husband's smile, and for a second, I let myself remember what peace had felt like. Just long enough to steady myself. Then I set the frame back down. Face up. It was almost time. The chairs in the community room filled faster than I expected. By 4:45 p.m., 10 residents had shown up. Some I knew well, some only by face or unit number. A few carried folders, pens, glasses on the tip of their noses. No one asked what exactly we were going to talk about. They came anyway. They felt the shift in the air. They'd lived long enough to recognize a reckoning when it started brewing in their own building. At 5:03, the door opened again. Trevor walked in. He didn't knock, didn't pause. Just entered like it was his right to be there, like the room belonged to him. He wore a blue button-down and a stiff jaw. He scanned the room and kept that polite, tight smile that people use in courtrooms and church lobbies. Behind him, Paige followed. Red lipstick, pressed beige coat, holding a folder against her chest like it was armor. I didn't look surprised. I didn't flinch. I simply pointed to the last 2 seats near the side wall. They sat. I didn't acknowledge them. I clicked the remote and the projector lit up with the title slide. Senior Autonomy and Legal Safeguards. No one spoke. I began with a short introduction. My name, my background, my intention. Then I turned the slide. The screen now displayed a sample prescription record, then the actual prescription record from my doctor, then the nurse's report, then the surveillance still of Paige entering my apartment. I read each line as if I were presenting a tax audit. Calm, precise, measured. Then I hit the next slide, and the room went still. There it was. The church letter, signed, dated, stamped, confirming the unauthorized withdrawal of funds in my name, with the originating email traced back to Trevor. A few people inhaled sharply. Others leaned forward, reading every word on the screen. Trevor shifted in his seat. I turned the projector off and let silence take over the room. Then I spoke. When you trust your family to protect you, and instead they manage your decline like a business model, you stop being a mother. You become an asset, or a liability, whichever is more convenient. No one said anything. Even Paige, who usually filled silence with smiles or excuses, stayed quiet. I reached into my folder and pulled out my original power of attorney. I held it up for the room to see. Then I passed a certified copy to Rochelle, who stood by the side of the room, arms folded, watching everything. She took it, flipped through the pages, and nodded. I continued. There are people in this room who've been told they're forgetful, unstable, incapable. Not by doctors, by family. And the first thing those families do is gain access. Medical access, financial access, legal access. Not because they care, but because they're planning for when you stop being useful. Then I turned to Trevor. For the first time that evening, I made eye contact with my son. I said nothing. I let the room turn its attention to him. He opened his mouth to speak. Paige placed a hand on his arm. He closed it. I closed the laptop and walked to the table near the door. I handed out copies of a small booklet I had prepared. It listed every resource I had gathered: legal aid numbers, advocacy groups, state reporting hotlines, local attorney recommendations for elder care protection. Then I passed around printed templates, statements of revocation, medical directives, account audit logs. I didn't need them to memorize anything. I needed them to see that we had tools, and that we had each other. I ended the session without applause or small talk. Residents began to leave, quiet, focused. Some folded the papers into their bags, others tucked them into their coats like insurance policies. Trevor remained seated. Paige kept her eyes on the floor. I walked over. I didn't raise my voice. You tried to take the one thing I have left, my clarity. You tried to replace it with paperwork. You failed. He stood, face flushed, trying to force calm. We were worried. You've been forgetful. You've been acting out of character. I stared at him. Out of character means I stopped letting you lie. Rochelle walked up beside me. She held out a folded letter. It was from the building director, confirming receipt of my complaint and noting that an investigation had been opened regarding resident interference and possible impersonation of medical authority. Trevor didn't take it, so Rochelle set it on the chair he had just left. He turned to leave. I called out, "You'll return the money to the church within 7 business days. In full, with written apology." He didn't turn back. I added one last sentence. "If not, I'll let the state decide." Paige said nothing as they walked out. Her heels echoed through the hall like a ticking clock running out of time. I watched them disappear around the corner. Then I turned to Rochelle. "That's done." She nodded, and then she smiled. Just a little. It was enough. The next morning, I opened my door to find an envelope taped to the frame. No name, no handwriting, just a plain manila envelope folded once, sealed with a strip of tape. I peeled it off and stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside were 3 printed pages, all screenshots. The first showed Paige's name and profile picture on a community caregiver app, a listing dated 2 months prior, advertising her services as a private home assistant and memory care specialist. The second screenshot was a calendar. My name appeared on several dates. Next to it, check marks and time blocks. The third was a review, written under a pseudonym but linked to the same account. Client shows early signs of cognitive decline. Multiple incidents of forgetfulness. Recommending further evaluation and long-term planning. My stomach tightened. It was a digital paper trail, a public smear job masked as caregiving. Paige had planted the groundwork. Slowly, quietly, she'd created a story for outsiders, a version of me that fit their plan. And now someone was handing me the proof. I didn't need to guess who. An hour later, Rochelle called to say Ms. Hanley had requested to meet. The building director wanted to speak with me about the material presented during the workshop. She had also received a follow-up complaint, this time from another resident, confirming manipulation of medications by a visiting family member. The tide was turning. I agreed to meet that afternoon. Before I left, I organized everything. I made a second copy of the screenshots and added them to the binder. Then I printed out the user agreement for the caregiver app, highlighting the section about unauthorized entries and defamation. When I arrived at the office, Ms. Hanley didn't waste time with introductions. She asked if I would be willing to sit down with a member of the legal coordination team for a formal interview. I said yes. 2 hours later, I had signed 3 statements. One outlined the fraudulent medication incident. One described the forged financial requests. And the third detailed the digital impersonation and targeted defamation. All 3 were filed into my resident profile and flagged for legal review. That night, I received another message from Trevor. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone." I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another one came. "You made a mistake. This won't end well." I screenshot both messages. I added them to the folder. At 9 p.m., someone knocked on my door. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it was deliberate. I opened it to find Paige standing there. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She stepped forward and held out a white envelope. Inside was a typed letter. 1 paragraph. "We acknowledge the actions taken were not authorized or appropriate. The funds withdrawn from the church will be returned in full within 5 business days. A letter of apology will be issued under separate cover." That was all it said. No name. No apology. No explanation. I folded it and set it on the table. She didn't ask to come inside. She didn't look around. She just said one sentence. "We never thought you'd actually fight back." Then she turned and walked away. I watched her disappear down the hall, shoulders drawn tight. And I realized then what she really feared. Not embarrassment, not legal consequences. She feared exposure, because exposure leaves marks that don't go away. The next morning, the church treasurer called to confirm receipt of the full repayment. A second letter, signed by Trevor and Paige, had been sent to Sister Janice. I asked her to email me a copy. She did. I printed it. I filed it. Then I called the resident council office and requested to schedule another meeting, not to escalate, not to accuse. This time, to propose a permanent resident-led committee focused on elder autonomy and legal literacy. Ms. Hanley approved it within the hour. 3 days later, we held our first session, 12 people showed up. This time there were questions, specific ones, about durable power of attorney, about access to medical records, about digital monitoring. They weren't afraid to speak now, because someone already had. After the meeting, Marta stayed behind to help clean up. She asked if I had forgiven them. I told her forgiveness wasn't required to protect myself. Sometimes you just close the door and keep it locked. The day after the repayment cleared, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at everything I had gathered one more time. The file was thick now. What started as suspicion had turned into a full-blown operation. Documents, images, letters, digital logs, signatures, and timestamps. A paper trail no one could rewrite. But there was still one piece left. One that needed to be dealt with face to face. Not for their sake, for mine. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I walked into the offices of Branson and Lee, a small legal firm I had used once years ago, when my husband and I updated our estate plan. I still remembered the smell of the leather-bound folders and the hum of the copier in the back room. That office hadn't changed. But I had. A junior associate led me to a conference room. Inside was Mr. Lee himself. Older now, hair whiter, hands a little slower as he extended them across the table. He asked how he could help. I pulled out my file and began to explain. Not the emotional side, not the betrayal, just the facts. The power of attorney had never changed. The church withdrawal was unauthorized. The digital impersonation had been verified by the app administrators. The medication interference had been documented and filed. The incident reports had been formally submitted to the building management. The threat messages had been time-stamped and backed up. I laid each item out like cards on a table. He read them quietly, one after the next. Then he leaned back and asked if I wanted to pursue criminal charges. I said no, not yet. But I did want something in writing, a formal revocation notice, one that clarified, permanently and without ambiguity, that Trevor Moreno was removed from any succession in financial or medical decisions. No fallback, no reconsideration, no way back in. Mr. Lee nodded and began drafting. It took 35 minutes. I signed it. Then I made 5 copies, one for the building, one for my church, one for Rochelle, one for my own files, and one that would be mailed to Trevor. No signature required, just delivery confirmation. When I walked out of the office, the sun had already begun to fade. The sidewalk outside shimmered in late afternoon heat, and I didn't stop walking until I reached the end of the block. I turned the corner and entered the branch of Sun Federal Bank. I didn't make an appointment. I walked straight to the counter and requested to speak with the manager. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from a woman named Cynthia, with clipped sentences and tired eyes. I told her I needed to audit the last 9 months of my account activity. She opened the profile and started clicking. Then she froze. I watched her brow tense as her eyes scanned the screen. She asked if I recognized several electronic withdrawals linked to a third-party payment service. I told her I did not. She printed the report. $2,800 total, spread over 7 months. Each withdrawal labeled with vague descriptions. Home care consulting, legal prep work, patient assessment coordination. All fake. All processed under Trevor's linked email address. He hadn't just taken money from the church, he had been quietly bleeding me too. I filed the paperwork for a formal dispute. Cynthia helped me lock the account and set up a new one. She issued me a new debit card on the spot and gave me a fresh checkbook with my updated information. It was done. As I walked back into my building, I passed by the lobby where Paige was talking to one of the younger residents. She saw me. Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite a frown. I didn't stop. I didn't need a scene. She knew, and that was enough. Back upstairs, I opened my email and scanned through my inbox. At the bottom of the list was a message from the Caregiver app, a formal apology. They had suspended Paige's account. Her caregiver profile had been removed pending investigation. A second message followed. This one from a resident I barely knew from the 9th floor. He had heard about the workshop. He asked if I would be offering another one next month. I replied with a single line. Yes. And this time with a lawyer present. The drama had shifted, no longer a private war behind closed doors, no longer a quiet battle over pills and signatures. Now it was public, documented, witnessed, tied up with red ribbons and official seals. But none of that mattered as much as what I felt walking back into my apartment that night. For the first time in months, there was no tension between my shoulders, no dull panic humming beneath the surface, no second-guessing my memory. Just silence. Just my breath. Just peace. And the knowledge that they would never touch me again. It didn't take long. 2 days after the account audit at the bank, a letter arrived in my mailbox from the building's legal liaison. It was stamped with the firm's letterhead and marked confidential, but I knew exactly what was inside. I didn't open it in the hallway. I waited until I got back to my apartment, washed my hands, sat at the kitchen table, and peeled it open like I was cutting through the last layer of something rotten. The letter was a formal notification. Trevor Moreno and Paige Lawson were now subject to a full internal review by the building's Resident Conduct Board. The review would include their unauthorized access to the premises, their involvement in repeated misrepresentation of medical needs for a listed resident, and their use of digital platforms to impersonate a caregiver without license or consent. The letter also stated that building security footage had been reviewed. Management confirmed that at least 2 unregistered entries had occurred under Paige's name, including one pre-dawn access on the morning I woke up disoriented. That was all the confirmation I needed. But the real fallout didn't come in a letter. It came in the form of silence. On the 3rd day, Trevor's car disappeared from the visitor parking lot. No note, no message, no follow-up apology, just gone. I walked past the front desk that morning, and Ron, the desk clerk who used to stammer around them, gave me a quick nod. A subtle thing, but it felt like respect. That same afternoon, Rochelle stopped by with a clipboard in hand. She asked if I wanted to see something. I followed her down to the office, where she pulled out a file from a drawer. Inside were printed complaints. Not from me, from other residents. A woman from the 4th floor had been pressured by her niece into signing over power of attorney, then watched her savings drain. Another man from the 6th had gone nearly a month without getting the right prescriptions because his son kept cancelling appointments behind his back. They saw what happened in my case. Now they were speaking up. That was the real win. When you light one match, it only burns a small space. But when others join in, the fire spreads. The silence ends. I left the office that day, feeling something close to weightlessness. But I wasn't done. The last item on my list was the church. I had been careful up until now. I didn't want to drag their name through any of this. I had respected Sister Janice, trusted her judgment, even when I doubted everything else. But I still needed closure. I arrived just before evening service. The building smelled like old wood and candle wax. The light through the stained glass windows cast long shadows down the aisle. Sister Janice was in the back, arranging hymnals. She saw me and straightened up, wiping her hands on her skirt. I told her I came for a final update. She nodded and led me to her office. Inside was a slim folder. She handed it to me. The first page was a signed receipt of repayment, full amount, verified by the church accountant. The second was the apology letter. This one was longer than the one Paige had shoved into my hands before. It wasn't heartfelt, but it was typed, signed, and legally admissible. The last page was what caught me off guard. It was a formal notice from the church leadership board. It stated that any future requests made under my name, financial or otherwise, would require in-person verification, photographic ID, and dual signature clearance, one from me and one from an appointed trustee approved by the church. They had added the policy after my incident. They called it the Moreno Clause. I didn't smile, but I did nod. Then I handed her an envelope of my own. Inside was a check, a donation to the church pantry. Not because I wanted to buy back pride, not because I owed anything, but because it mattered to me that the people who needed help would still get it. From someone who hadn't forgotten what it meant to give without taking. I left the church that evening without looking back. Back home, I made tea. I turned on the small lamp in the living room, the one with the chipped base my husband had once glued back together after it tipped during a storm. The apartment was still, but it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I had reclaimed every inch of that silence, and the people who tried to fill it with lies, pills, and paperwork were gone. They had underestimated the one thing they couldn't touch, the clarity of someone who knows who she is, even when everyone else tries to write her story for her. That was the final blow, and I made sure they felt it. 3 days after the church processed the final confirmation of repayment, I got a call from Rochelle. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. She said Trevor had shown up at the building, not through the front lobby, through the back side gate. He had signed in at the visitor kiosk using the old code he wasn't supposed to have anymore. Ron hadn't been at the desk. The new clerk had let him through, assuming everything had already been cleared. Rochelle said she caught it fast and had security check the cameras. Trevor went straight up to my floor, didn't knock, didn't linger, just stood outside my door for 10 minutes, then left. He didn't leave a note, didn't ring the bell, just stood there. When I heard that, I didn't feel fear, not anymore. I felt something colder, sharper, resolve. I walked to my file cabinet, opened the drawer, and pulled out the final document I had saved for this exact moment. A letter of revocation paired with a notice of cease and desist. The document had already been notarized and signed. It had been sitting in my binder for a week, waiting. I had told Mr. Lee I'd deliver it if and only if Trevor broke the boundary again. He had. So now I would. The next morning, I delivered a sealed copy to the legal liaison office at the front desk, along with a short written statement confirming that Trevor Moreno was no longer permitted to enter or access the property in any capacity. I requested they log the statement and attach it to the building's resident records. Ms. Hanley signed off on it that afternoon. At 4:30, a delivery confirmation landed in my inbox. The official documents had been received and signed for by Trevor at an address across town. I pictured him opening the envelope, reading the first few lines, realizing there was no loophole left. He wasn't coming back in. Not through the side gate, not through any gate. Later that same evening, a soft knock came at my door. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't cautious either. When I opened it, Paige stood there. No folder, no coat, no heels, just a plain black cardigan, hair pulled back, and a look I had never seen on her face. She didn't try to walk in. She handed me a small envelope. Her fingers trembled when she let go. Then she turned and walked away. Inside the envelope was a letter, short, handwritten. It said she was leaving Trevor, said she was sorry for everything. Not because she'd been caught, but because she had seen what he was willing to do. And worse, what she was willing to excuse. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't ask for a response. At the bottom of the page, there was a single line, I didn't know what real strength looked like until I saw you stand up. I set the letter down on the counter. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken either. It was something else, something quieter. Closure. The next morning, I called the church pantry and asked if they needed an extra hand organizing the donations that had come in over the holidays. Sister Janice answered. She didn't ask where I'd been, just said she'd meet me at the back entrance at noon. I packed a small bag, gloves, bottled water, a sandwich, nothing heavy. Before leaving, I took one last look around the apartment. Not to check anything, just to feel it, to stand in it. Every inch of this place had been pulled back from the edge, piece by piece, document by document, truth by truth. And now the space was mine again, fully mine. As I walked out and locked the door behind me, I didn't carry bitterness in my chest, only something even heavier. Peace, earned, kept, and never again negotiable. The courthouse door clicked behind me like the final note in a symphony, the kind of sound that lingered, not with dread, but with relief. Cool air hit my face, but I no longer flinched. For the first time in years, I wasn't being led, silenced, or pushed out. I had walked out on my own, on my terms. Grant and Kayla stayed behind with their attorneys. There was nothing left to say. The moment the judge signed off on the agreement, it was over. The trust had been restored in my name. The ranch was no longer in Grant's control. My late husband's legacy, once twisted and hidden behind legal trickery, was finally upright again. The irony didn't escape me. It wasn't revenge that saved me. It wasn't fury. It was paperwork, patience, and one very tired old woman who simply refused to disappear quietly. I spent that night alone in the guest cabin at the back of the property. I didn't go back to the main house, not yet. It was still filled with memories that belonged to a different version of me. The Evelyn who baked birthday cakes Grant forgot to thank her for. The Evelyn who kept quiet when Kayla called her a burden with a smile too polished to challenge. Morning came with an old bluebird tapping at the windowsill, the same one that used to perch on the porch rail back when Robert was alive. I took it as a sign, or maybe just company. I made coffee, sat on the wooden steps, and let the silence stretch wide like the fields. By noon, I started packing. Not to leave, to reset. I boxed up the framed photos that once lined the main hallway, the ones where my face had been cropped or blurred or completely absent. Those were going away. In their place, I put up a series of black and white portraits of women I admired. My mother, my grandmother, myself, holding Robert's hand the day we bought the ranch. That day, we were equals. Over the next few weeks, I met with a team from a nonprofit that helps train older women in legal literacy and estate management. I knew the feeling of being locked out of documents you once helped build. I knew the feeling of being called crazy when you asked to see your own name. So I gave a portion of my newly reclaimed assets to create the Marston Women's Foundation, focusing on rural widows. Not just grants or pamphlets, real, practical resources, lawyers, advocates, mentors. I didn't tell Grant. I didn't need to. He had moved into a rental near downtown. The truck was gone, probably sold. He called once, left a message, said he needed closure. That word again. I never called back. Some things don't require a curtain speech. Sometimes silence is the cleanest form of dignity. Kayla, from what I heard, filed for separation not long after. Her name had never been on the real assets, despite her belief otherwise. She had power only when she was close to mine. Once that tether was cut, she drifted into her own reckoning. I kept the rocking chair, the one from the front porch. I moved it into the barn, next to the new bookshelves and a small writing desk I had built. I started journaling again, not to make sense of things, but to remind myself that my story never ended at someone else's chapter. Then came the ceremony. The local paper had run a small article about the foundation, nothing flashy. But somehow, someone from the State Women's Council picked it up. They reached out, asked if I would accept a community service award in March. I almost said no. Then I remembered the version of me who had sat across from Ashby that first day, hands shaking, voice barely above a whisper. So I said yes. At the event, I stood at the podium and didn't think about Grant or Kayla. I thought about the woman in the third row, probably in her late 60s, wearing her only good coat. The way she watched me with quiet intensity told me she had her own story, her own betrayal, maybe her own son. After the applause faded, she walked up and asked where she could apply for help. I gave her my card, told her we'd be in touch. That was all she needed. Not every story ends in fire or fury. Some end with open windows, warm wind, and a key placed gently back in your own hand. That night, back in my cabin, I opened the window wide. The bluebird came again, tapping gently before flying off. I closed my eyes, no longer afraid to rest. My name is Evelyn Marston. I was betrayed by the people I once loved most. I fought with paper, not fists, with memory, not bitterness. And I healed not because they apologized, but because I decided I didn't need them to. And that, truly, is what freedom feels like. If this story made you feel something, even just a little shift inside, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe you've walked through something similar. Maybe you've watched someone else rise from betrayal with quiet grace. Either way, your story matters. Leave a comment and let's keep this space honest, raw, and healing.